All right, aloha everyone. My name is Hongmin Cho, and I'm going to give you a briefing about Northeast Asia security dynamics within 20 minutes, and that's very challenging. So bear with me if I go a little bit quickly, but I'll do my best to summarize the key trends as much as possible. So the view here, the lecture includes my own opinions, but of course that does not represent this institute's perspectives. So simply, I will go over the regional overview, the features of Northeast Asia, and then I'll address some key problems of today, and then I'll discuss the ways to move forward. Specifically for the problems, I will address North Korea problem and Japan, South Korea, SPAD, and then China's challenge in the region, and then the regional players' response to China's challenge. And then following that order, on the third section, I will address how we can, what we should care about when we cope with North Korea's nuclear challenges, and is there any way to move forward with the Japan and South Korea relationship, and then the difficulties of coping with China's challenge, especially in the economic domain. All right, so many analysts and experts of international security, they tend to agree that there are 4 hotspots where the US and China can militarily conflict: South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, East China Sea, and Korean Peninsula. And then out of these 4 hotspots where there is a potential that the US and China militarily conflict, 3 of them are located in Northeast Asia. So that's why this sub-region is really important for the stability of the Indo-Pacific region as a whole. But then again, it is really complex because of the complex patch of diverse relationship. As we all know, as a starter, the Northeast Asia is divided between the US alliance system composed of South Korea, Japan, Taiwan as a part of a close partner, and then closely aligned among China, Russia, and North Korea. So there is that legacy of the Cold War, but we are not living in the Cold War era, and then it gets really complex that South Korea, Japan, and China, they started their own trilateral cooperation in 2008. They formed this event called the Trilateral Summit, which was supposed to be an annual summit. So for the first 5 years, from 2008 to 2012, the heads of the 3 countries, South Korea, Japan, and China, they get together. And then the main agenda was regional prosperity, focusing on economic cooperation and the cultural exchange. So let's not talk about sensitive political or security issue, but focus on economy. So that was the idea. And of course, but they cannot overcome the history issue. So the annual event was stopped in the year 2013, 14, 16, 17, and 19. 2018, there was a trilateral summit, but it didn't last. North Korea, South Korea also economically cooperate. Taiwan and China also closely cooperate with the trade agreement in 2008. So you can see there is a complex patch between the security dynamics and economic cooperation. Making the structure more complex, there is a historical, some bad feeling between Japan and the 2 Koreas, China. So when it comes to Japan, North Korea, and South Korea, they have a one voice, and similarly with Beijing. So you can see already the complex patch and structure is emerging in Northeast Asia. So let me go over some specific questions, problems in Northeast Asia. First, of course, we start with North Korea's nuclear challenges. So there is this question that everyone is struggling to grappling with answering. Why has been North Korea trying so hard to develop nuclear weapons despite all the sanctions and then the international opposition? First, of course, in their language, they are they feel threatened by the U.S. forces in South Korea and the U.S. alliance system. And then there is a long-standing speculation that because North Korea needs hard cash so much, so they may sell out their nuclear knowledge and then nuclear technology. So there has been evidence that North Korea has been already exporting its chemical weapons and the other types of weapons of mass destruction. So there is a good chance that North Korea is always tempted to export nuclear technology and knowledge to the rogue countries like Iran. And also there is domestic politics model that so there is a power struggle between not PLA, KPA, Korean People's Army, and then Korean Workers' Party. So when there is a tension between the army and then the party, of course, Kim Jong-il, with his military-first policy, he greatly empowered the military. So the party wants to maintain some balance between economic development and the national defense, but the domestic hegemony is in the hands of the generals. So of course, generals, they are dominating the national resources and they want to continue to have that resources and power. So there is the interest group dynamic with the KPA. And also, it is about the symbol of state's power and identity. So every country has its own national official narrative. South Korea has a state narrative of it's being proud of industrialization and democratization. North Korea has no such a success story. It can only rely on the story of nuclear weapon as the symbol of North Korea's hyper-nationalism. So for the security model and then economic utility, maybe the outside forces, including the US forces, US and South Korea, we can address North Korea's concerns, but domestic politics or NOMS model, nuclear weapon as a symbolism, it is hard for Washington and Seoul to address. But why is it so urgent? It poses existential threat to US and allies. And also there is what political scientists call the stability and instability dilemma. Because of nuclear weapons, Pyongyang is now very confident that even if they engage in some conventional provocation, the other countries, South Korea, Japan, they are more deterred by North Korea's nuclear weapon. Having that belief, that drives Pyongyang's more provocation. Let me move on to the history problem between South Korea and Japan. There is an individual leaders factor. So before Moon Jae-in, the current president of South Korea, Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye, they are from the Conservative Party. And then traditionally, Conservative Party in South Korea is more willing to engage with Japan. They are critical of Japan's war apology problem, but they are more willing to engage than the leftist or progressive in South Korea. So when Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye were presidents, on the Japanese side, the prime ministers were from the Democratic Party, not the current LDP. Compared to Liberal Democratic Party, which is conservative and right-wing oriented in Japanese politics, Democratic Party at the time, Prime Minister Kan, Hatoyama, they were more willing to engage with South Korea and China as well. So there was a good match. So on the South Korean side and then on the Japanese side, there was a good willingness to engage with each other. But Moon Jae-in government is a little bit more nationalistic compared to the Conservative Party. And then Shinzo Abe was also from the Conservative Party. So this was a bad match. And then at the public opinion level, South Korean people are always frustrated with seemingly Japan's insincere apology. And then Japanese people are frustrated with Korean people's endless demand of the apology. And then some people feel are feeling threatened by South Korea's rise. In terms of Samsung is becoming global brand, replacing, maybe challenging Sony or Panasonic before. And then South Korea's army is also getting stronger while it is trying to cope with North Korea's growing military. So there is also some threat perception. And then at the international level, there is a rise of protectionism and popularism all over the world. So all in combined, so that contributes to the worsening relationship between Japan and South Korea. All right. China's problem, of course, China wants to have a firm control over Hong Kong and then prevents separation of Taiwan or independence of Taiwan. So there is a difference in political ideology. Hong Kong people want more, they have more democratic ideas. They want more autonomy. Taiwan basically is a democratic country. But from Chinese perspective, Chinese Communist Party's perspective, what is more concerning is it is not only about political ideology, it is also about political identity, which is much more deeper and more fundamental element in politics. So if you see the chart on the left side, this is a young Hong Kong people's identity. So early 2000s, in the year 2000, average of Hong Kong people, about 25%, they feel that they are Chinese. And then in 2009, right after the Beijing Olympics, about 40% of the Hong Kong population, they feel that they are Chinese. But even then, the young Hong Kong people feel less that they are Chinese. And then in 2018, it is almost zero. So young generation in Hong Kong, they feel more and more that they are Hong Kongers, not Chinese. And then the similar phenomenon is detected in Taiwan case. So in 1994, about 50% of Taiwanese people identify themselves as both Taiwanese and Chinese. But over time, you can see the trend that absolutely majority of people in Taiwan, they identify themselves as distinctly Taiwanese as opposed to Chinese. So this is a big concern for the Communist Party, and they want to take coercive measures before too late, even if it causes some international friction. And also, there is a China trade security dilemma that in Northeast Asia, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, they are allies who are close partners with the US when it comes to international security, but they are heavily relying on the Chinese market for their exports. So if you see that on the left side, in terms of the percentage of total exports, Australia, about 35%, their export goes to China, followed by Taiwan, Korea, Chile, and Japan. So among the top 5 countries that heavily rely on Chinese market for exports, 3 of them are located in Northeast Asia, meaning that to that extent, Northeast Asia is dependent upon Chinese market. In other words, China is really exerting economic influence in this region. North Korea is about 95%, 94% of import from China, 90% to export. So it is underestimating to say that North Korean economy is dependent upon China. It just belongs to China, Chinese economy. So China, that's how China can exert great influence over North Korea. But there is more story why it has been so ineffective. I mean, China's attempt to control Pyongyang was so ineffective. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper about the trade security dilemma. There is some observation that Japan is very supporting the US-led initiatives to cope with China's growing influence in East Asia, as opposed to South Korea. South Korea has been so passive compared to Japan, but that different attitude can be explained by the trade structure. So if you see Japan, Japan's exports destination, about 20% goes to US and then 70% goes to China. So when it comes to trade market, the US is more important market for Japan than in China. But if you compare South Korea, South Korea exports to China 25% and then 12% to the US. So it means compared to Japan, South Korea's trade is more dependent upon China. And then the economic structure itself is that Korea economy is dependent upon the trade. Because Korea is more dependent upon trade than Japan, and then South Korea is more dependent upon the Chinese market than the US market. So that means China can exert more influence over South Korea with its coercive economic statecraft. So that's South Korea's dilemma. So for the next 4 minutes, I'll go over what is important to maintain the stability. So we talk, when it comes to North Korea, we talk a lot about maximum pressure. So that's the maximum goal that we want to achieve, no nuclear weapons. At the medium, we want to stop further progress of North Korea's nuclear and then missile capability development. At the minimum, we want to avoid the war. Now our goal is fixated at the maximum goal. But by definition, maximum goal is so hard to achieve. So while we are so focused on maximum goal, we may make mistake of going down to even not keeping the minimum goal. So my suggestion is that maximum goal is hard to achieve by definition, but we have been good at maintaining the minimum goal. At least we have not seen the major war on the Korean Peninsula. So we should be proud of that. And then while we are focusing on maximum goal, the maximum goal should not frustrate us too much that we are distracted from the more important goal of maintaining the minimum goal, meaning the deterrence against North Korea's provocation. For the Japan-Korea problem, there are moderate Koreans and moderate Japanese. Moderate Japanese recognize, so they are willing to understand Korean people's depth of historical grievances. And moderate Koreans, including myself, recognize Japan's post-war pacifist policies. So by far the history debate is they focusing on the nasty nationalist Japanese or Koreans each other. And the media exaggerates that a lot. But there are records of Japanese visiting comfort women victims, and they apologize. Left side picture is the Japanese journalist. Right side picture shows the Japanese high school students. They visit the victims of Japanese sex slave, and then they are having a discussion with them. So to that extent, and also if you Google the list of Japan war apology statement, there are about 50 times records of Japanese politicians, prime minister and emperor making some war apology statement. The fact of record is embarrassing for both Koreans and Japanese. For Koreans who believe that Japanese never apologized by far, but there is a record. And for the Japanese who believe that Japan should never apologize, but there is also the record of apologies. So my suggestion is that instead of focusing on the extreme nationalism on both sides, moderate Koreans and moderate Japanese, should have debate inside, and they should work together to moderate and calm down this nationalist the impulse, and that's where the political courage is most needed. And then that's the point where the US can intervene. This is the last slide. So we are in the whole of society era when it comes to US-China strategic competition. So security and ideology we can address. There is some popular talk of China model, but it is not really effective. The economic domain is the most challenging one if we compare the US and China types of sanctions. So in order to cope with China's unofficial, frequently deniable unilateral sanctions, the US and allies should work together how to cope with China's economic challenges. So with that, this is the summary of my lecture. So I addressed the 3 problems of North Korea, South Korea-Japan relationship, and China's challenge, and then how we can cope with that. And this is my suggestion. This is my opinion only. And then I introduce this in an effort to stimulate our discussion in the next session. Thank you very much.